The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein, former publisher of Automotive News, is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.
Welcome to SiriusXM's Cars and Culture. I'm your host, Jason Stein. If Rick French isn't the busiest man in show business, he's certainly close. And listen closely, it's a laundry list of activities that he's a part of. He's currently working with the NFL and NHL on technology to improve helmets and better protect players. He's spending an unusual amount of time in Malta filming a movie, one of 5 he has in various stages of development. Rick's also working with the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. He's co-owner of the Daytona Tortugas. He's an investor in 2 NBA franchises, and he's managing partner of Pre-Productions. If that isn't enough, he's a national trustee of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and holds board positions at the Texas Heritage Songwriters Association, Teen Cancer America, and North Carolina's Public Broadcasting System. Oh, and he's also chairman and CEO of French West Vaughan, one of the largest agencies in the world. And what did you do today? If you're Rick French, you're at the epicenter of so many interesting activities. One might say that you're truly developing a culture all your own, cultivating it, creating it. He's one heck of a car guy as well. Most of his career moves are intertwined with the automobile. In fact, he once risked his life for a car. The stories, the people, the experiences are numerous for a guy who seemingly is involved in everything. Not to mention a historic backyard concert held every year in Los Angeles that attracts the who's who of the music world and helps raise money and awareness for teen cancer. At the time of taping, Coldplay was considering how to get Chris Martin to the event. But let Rick tell you his story, one filled with passion and automotive energy and all the elements that bind the fabric of America. Rick French, entrepreneur, entertainment mogul, and a true car guy on Cars and Culture.
Hi, I'm Rick French, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Well, it's always good to have a fellow journalist on the program. It's not often that we get the chance to talk to journalists who have become movie producers and minor league owners and members, national trustees of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum, but here he is, the journalist, Rick French. How are you?
Hey, thank you, Jason. Well, reformed journalists, right?
Right. You and me both.
Yeah, exactly. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you. Let's talk about the movie first. I know you are just starting. Well, you're going to be spending some time in Malta coming up. Malta. So you're going from North Carolina to Malta, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time under development there. Let's talk about the movie to get us started off here.
Sure. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me today, and enjoy your show. And so it's an honor to be part of it. So so the movie is called Not Without Hope, and it's a story that's based off a tragic true story that took place in 2009, where 2 NFL players, one whom played for the Detroit Lions, Corey Smith, the other Marquise Cooper, who played for the Oakland Raiders. They had been former teammates with the Tampa Bay Bucks, went out on a fishing trip in the Gulf of Mexico with a friend of mine, Nick Schuyler, and his best friend, Will Bleakley. And unfortunately, tragic events unfolded where their anchor got stuck at a fishing hole 70 miles out in the Gulf, and a bad storm was coming. It was forecasted to be the worst storm to hit the Gulf of Mexico, and it turned out to be that way in about a quarter century. And they made a fateful decision to not cut the anchor, but instead tie it to the back of the boat and try to gun the engine to dislodge it. And it flipped the boat, and it plunged them into frigid cold waters. And basically 2.5 days or 43 hours roughly of them being in the water ensued. And it was It turned, unfortunately, into a terrible tragedy where there was only one survivor, Nick Schuyler, and he was found 43 hours later by the United States Coast Guard after a heroic search and rescue effort. And that's the story. And it became a New York Times #1 bestseller. It spawned Oprah Winfrey specials and an HBO Real Sports segment that won an Emmy. And so that's the movie. That's a story we're telling as a scripted feature. It's been in development for 13 years, and it's kind of had its own wild ride in trying to get the movie made. So there's both a feature version of this story that is began production here really just a couple days ago in Malta. I'm heading to the set to oversee production. But there's also a documentary version of the story that Dwayne Johnson and I are making together for a major streaming network. And so there's two versions of the same story being told. The facts are the same. It's just how you're telling the story. And so that's the movie that we'll be releasing probably in 2024. So it's directed by Joe Carnahan, who's well known for his movies The Gray and Smoking Aces and so on. And Zachary Levi, who stars as Shazam, is starring, and Pierce Brosnan is playing the Coast Guard captain, and Jo Beth Williams is playing the role of Nick's mother, which kind of the thought of her going to his funeral is what kept Nick going and kind of kept him alive. And so it's a star-studded cast, and we're looking forward to honoring the memories of those that were lost.
How did you get involved?
So the family reached out. Actually, a lawyer for the family reached out to a colleague of mine in our Tampa office back in 2009, just days after the tragedy. And there was just a media onslaught. You had two NFL players lost at sea, right? And so the worldwide media kind of descended on Tampa, and the family needed some help. Nick was rescued. He was in the hospital. He was unable to speak on his own behalf. And so they asked if our firm, my firm, French West Vaughan, would represent the family. And so I agreed to do that. And one thing kind of led to another, and publishers and other producers came calling after Nick finally spoke about what had happened. And ultimately, he asked if I would take on a broader role in kind of just managing this whole process. And so I brokered the book deal with HarperCollins. It became the New York Times bestseller, and did a lot, helped with the publicity tour, and have shepherded the movie through its various iterations. We were about to make it 2 years ago with Miles Teller starring, and just weeks before production, COVID hit, and we couldn't make the movie. And prior to that, Dwayne Johnson himself was set to star as Nick Schuyler, the survivor, and the studio that had attached him was forced into bankruptcy. And so there's just been, you could almost make a movie about the making of the movie. It's been that difficult to actually make and tell the story. But here we are, and it's finally in production, and we hope to, honor the memories of those that were lost, and really do so in a way that doesn't just make people remember how they died, but give some perspective of how they lived.
Right. Amazing. I sort of half joked at the opening your journalism background, which is, of course, where you started when you first left school. But could you ever have imagined getting involved as a movie producer?
Now, and there's days I question why I ever got involved as a movie producer. No, I could not. But here's how I look at it. As a journalist, you have a certain palette you can paint on, right? It may be very short form in terms of its content, or it may be long form. All journalists are storytellers in a way. And so the move into from journalism to public relations and advertising, where we create short form content all day, wasn't that big of a leap. And so then taking the leap from there to where you have a short form content that you're producing to having a bigger palette for long form content in film and television and the things that I'm doing now was just kind of a natural evolution. But if you asked me back when I graduated from Oakland University as a journalism major, if I ever thought I would be making major motion pictures in Hollywood and working with Dwayne Johnson or working with, I've got 3 other projects, a couple others in production, another major music biopic going into production later this year. If I ever thought I'd be working with those people on a daily basis and shepherding these projects, the answer is surely no.
But you're still telling stories. Let's talk about
exactly.
those. Let's talk about those 3 other projects, and specifically the one that you just mentioned.
So right now I've got I have a documentary in production in the UK on the late rocker Eddie Cochran, who died tragically in a taxi cab accident in the UK shortly after Buddy Holly died, who was a close friend of his. And so I have the privilege of being chairman of the board of the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. So that's a conservatorship that was set up by his widow, Maria Elena Holly, to oversee the exploitation of Buddy Holly's rights and legacy. And so after conversations with her and others who were kind of in the Buddy Holly camp about what they thought was a miss back in the original Buddy Holly story, and that the story wasn't told quite the right way, even though it got critical acclaim. And it was the first music biopic. It kind of made Gary Busey's career. We decided to retell that story through a different lens. And so later this year, I'll be producing and overseeing the storytelling on the movie Clear Lake. That's where Buddy Holly died in the plane crash. And doing it in conjunction with Maria Elena, who many people refer to as the widowed bride, because Don McLean made her very famous in the song American Pie. So we're telling it through a different lens. Buddy Holly was very much the Jackie Robinson of his time in terms of a barrier breaker and so on, in terms of melding cultures and musical influences together and so on. And so we're telling it through that lens. And Gary Fleeter, who has made some really great movies, Runaway Jury, and I think it was Underdog, the Ernie Davis story, and that is helming this movie as our director. And we haven't announced it yet, but I'll tell your listeners here, John Cusack is just attached to play Norman Petty, who was Buddy's brilliant but a little bit controlling manager. Nellie is set to star as Chuck Berry. Diane Guerrero from Orange Is the New Black is set to play Maria Elena Holly. So there's a big cast that has been assembled. It's set up at a major studio, and so I needed to get through making and delivering, for the most part, Not Without Hope, and the documentary version of Not Without Hope called 4 Down, which is set to open at Sundance next year. I needed to deliver those projects before, as well as complete the documentary, before I could kind of tackle this next major one in Clear Lake.
Unbelievable. I mean, you're also managing the company that you lead, French West Vaughan. You're also involved with minor league baseball, 2 NBA teams.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet. I mean, Rick, this is a full slate.
It is a full slate. Yeah, thanks. there are days where it feels a little more full than others.
I'm sure.
I have great people that I've surrounded myself with. They help carry the water on a lot of these initiatives. the agency has been around for 26 years, and I've got some great partners and senior executives who do a great job for our clients. And that allows me to have a little bit of breathing room to explore some of these other projects and things that I'm interested in. And so, and baseball has its own cadence. We're in season right now, and there's a lot of things that we have to do with game day operations, but I have a great front office and staff who kind of oversee the day-to-day operations of the team down in Daytona Beach, which, interestingly enough, is where Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier.
That's right.
If you saw the movie 42, bringing this whole full circle, with Chadwick Boseman, there were no other cities in Florida that would allow Jackie Robinson to take the field when he was there with the Dodgers during spring training. And the city of Daytona Beach did allow it to take place at the old City Island ballpark. That's still where we play today. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, so we have become a major part of the custodianship, I guess, for lack of a better word, of Jackie Robinson's legacy. The ballpark has been renamed after him as Jackie Robinson Ballpark. It's a pilgrimage shrine for baseball purists. They come from all over the world to sit in the grandstands, the Jim Crow bleachers of the era, and we allow them to go out and stand at home plate where Jackie Robinson first stood and made civil rights history, really, as well as baseball history. So yeah, but that's got its season, and so that moves along, and then you have the off season. And so I've just kind of found a way to kind of have my hand in and oversee a lot of these things during different parts of the year. So I obviously have the ADD as well, apparently, because to have that many things to try to juggle, but it kind of works for me.
You've had two instances in your life that have really shaped where you would ultimately, where your career would ultimately lead. They both involve cars.
Yeah.
And they both involve Detroit. Let's talk about the first one on Friday, March 13th, 1987.
Yeah, fun day.
What happened that day when you were 24 years old?
Yeah.
That really changed the course of your life?
Well, so that was a Friday the 13th, as you said. So there is something to that, that idea. So I was trying to make it as a professional tennis player. I had played college tennis. I'd been a very good junior player, and I was kind of giving it a shot on tour. I had a job as a journalist because tennis in those days, you weren't making a lot of money, especially on what's the equivalent today of the satellite tour. So I was still writing for newspapers and so on, but I was home from a tour stop, and I was dating a girl who later became my spouse, but in the Grosse Pointes, and we'd come back from the Ice Capades and a night out with her sister and her boyfriend that became her husband. And after coming back to her parents' house, her father at the time was vice chairman of Ford. He was head of the U.S. heavy truck division for Ford as well. He worked on the team that worked with Lee Iacocca on the Mustang originally. Who, by the way, Lee Iacocca and his family used to be next door neighbors to my grandparents in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. So there's a lot of inner things that are intertwined. But anyway, long story short, came back from the Ice Capades and left her house and went to get in my car, and three kids, 18, 17, and 16, pulled up behind my car, and actually the car I had just bought with the limited amount of earnings that I had won on tour was the Ford EXP.
Sure.
You remember that car when
Sure.
at the time
Small
the two-seaters were,
yeah.
were really popular. Um, they asked me if I wanted them to steal my car, to which you might imagine what my response would be. First of all, I was surprised that somebody's asking if I wanted my car stolen. But then when I was scraping the snow off the windshield and got into the car and tried to back up, they still wouldn't move. So I walked up to the car and confronted them, and they got out and jumped me, and I was able to. Was an athlete and strong. I was able to fight two of them off. The third one had a 9-inch buck hunting knife, and we got into a tussle on the ground after I'd knocked one of the kids out. And but he had that knife, and he had it held in between his fingers, and he continuously stabbed me. So he stabbed me in the back 6 times. And that effectively, I survived. I was in critical condition from blood loss and so on. Fortunately, the police and ambulance and that were able to get me to a local hospital and to save my life. But that essentially ended my professional tennis career and my aspirations for that. And while it probably didn't have to, at the time, there was no provision for something like this on tour, where if you had an injury like this, you would retain your points. And so later on, when Monica Seles was stabbed on court, they created what essentially became the Monica Seles rule to protect a player's points.
Right.
But this was something different and prior to that. And so I would have had to go through the challenger circuit again, and after all the rehab and lost points, to try to get back up to tournaments where you could actually make some money. And so at that point, I decided, given the circumstances, that I had a choice to make. I could either rehab or I could pursue a full-time career as a journalist, and that's what I chose to do. And so it set me off on the path. And when I give lectures and talk to people, I say, God works in strange ways, right? Because I think I could have slogged along on the satellite tour and certainly made it up to essentially the major leagues of professional tennis. But I was never Bjorn Borg or John McEnroe or Jimmy Connors. And so I probably would have slogged along, and I would have let my college degree in journalism get stale. And instead, this set me on a different course, and it set me down the path of journalism that's led to, my public relations career and everything else that's come along. So in a strange way, I think these 3 kids who were high on meth, and they were tried and convicted and so on, but they almost did me a favor.
Wow. Then it's another Ford vehicle that several years later leads you to where you're sitting now.
Yeah, it really crazy enough, scary right?
Incident.
Yeah, so it was a late January day. As you said, a couple of years later, I had gone from journalism to a position with Comerica Bank in public relations when it was still headquartered in Detroit, and then left there and went to an agency that's still based in the RenCen. And long story short, I was heading to my office when my car kind of slipped off the road. It was very icy conditions. I had a Ford Thunderbird at the time, and that was the rear wheel version of the Thunderbird. And loved the car, but it had no traction in snow. And so after waiting for AAA to get me out of the ditch in freezing cold, I walked into my office around noon that day. And my phone was ringing. I picked it up, and it was a recruiter who was calling about an opportunity here in North Carolina with a chemical company. Excuse me, they were looking for a head of corporate communications and wanted to know if I would be interested. And I had been working on a chemical industry account for this PR firm in Detroit. And I said, I'm really not interested in leaving Michigan. I had family there. I love the Metro Detroit area, still love the Metro Detroit area, have family there, and now business interests back in Detroit again. But I just casually said, so what's the weather like today in North Carolina? Now, whether it was true or not, he said it was 72 and sunny. And after freezing, after they towed my car out of that ditch, I said, all right, maybe I'll come down and interview with you. And
Right.
and I did. They got me down there literally a couple days later, and it was a little bit unseasonably warm, but it was low 70s, and they would not let me leave here in the Raleigh-Durham area without an offer in hand. And they made me such an attractive offer at the time that there was almost no way to say no to it. And so that's how I ended up in North Carolina here in 1991, and have made it home ever since.
It's amazing. You have such a wide range of eclectic business interests, music to sports to media to entertainment to private equity. You have said they all align with your personal interests. And many people, you're quoted as saying, cite the Kevin Bacon rule of 6 degrees of separation, but you generally have 1 degree of separation from things that you know very well.
That's right. No, and that is the business rule that I apply to my investments and so on. Almost everything that I'm involved with are things that I would be involved with if I wasn't being paid to do so, or if I wasn't investing in those ventures. So, sports, media, entertainment are things that I personally enjoy. And so that has guided a lot of the things that I've chosen to get involved with. And it's partly because I feel then that I can contribute to those endeavors in a meaningful way, rather than just putting money in or becoming a partner in some way. And so that has been my guiding principle. I don't really do much in the way of tech or healthcare or other areas, even though those are practice areas within our agency. They are not the areas that I'm personally interested in. So if I can't, if I look at the hub being my start as a journalist and my background as a marketer, then everything has to be that 1 degree of separation from what I know really well, or an area that really I'm interested in, for me to choose to get involved. And that's what's kind of guided the things in the NBA or professional baseball or film and television production, or investments in, I'm a partner in a sports technology company that is developing new protective headwear for the NFL and the NHL and so on, doing it with a fascinating group of high-profile people. I wouldn't have gotten involved with that group of people if it wasn't for that 1 degree of separation rule and just feeling like I can contribute something to the company.
This is Cars and Culture, and certainly there's no more cultural icon than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It preserves culture, it keeps culture, it celebrates culture. And within the music culture, there's, of course, the celebration of cars. So there's an intersection there. Tell me how you got involved in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a national trustee.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting and coincidental story. So I was on a trip to China on behalf of the White House. We were negotiating with the Politburo there over media censorship policies in advance of the Beijing Olympic Games, the Summer Games back.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, so in 08. So this was in 05. I have to think about this now. 05 that these negotiations and discussions started, and it was because I was on the board of the Council of PR firms at the time. So they asked several executives who had both public relations and media experience to be part of these discussions. And so for 6 months, we kind of prepped for going over there as part of this mission. the mission itself was highly unsuccessful. The Chinese people were and the government were very warm and cordial to us as visitors, but in typical fashion, they will listen, nod their head, and do exactly what they've always done. And so, in trying to affect policy, where people who were coming, to Beijing at the time, would be able to freely talk and express their views, and even talk about things like Tiananmen Square, which, of course, to the Chinese never existed. They just would not really respond to anything that we were talking about. Everything was under consideration. But one of the guys that happened to be on that trip was a gentleman from Cleveland who is a really dear friend of mine now. But he was the CEO of America's oldest PR firm, which is based out of Cleveland, Ohio. And we had, official delegation dinners and lunches every single day and evening during this, 10-day trip. And one night over, I don't remember, I think it was Peking duck we were eating. He said that he was not traveling back with the rest of the delegation because he was staying in China for the Rolling Stones' first concert in mainland China in 25 years. And I said, wait a second, how did you get tickets to something like that? And he shared that he was on the board of trustees of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I casually said, over a very large Budweiser, because, it's funny, in China, Budweiser is their import beer, right, at the time. And so they served us a lot of Budweiser. And while I can't say that I'm the biggest Budweiser fan, that's what you drank. I casually threw out, if you're ever looking to expand the board, keep me in mind. And I told them a little bit about helping. We were representing Ford at the time, and Ford was one of the early corporate partners to Fremantle, the production company that produces American Idol. And they needed Ford to come on board to help underwrite, to help get that concept off the ground here in the United States. So we had helped, put that together and so on. And so, long story short, I just said, if you're looking to expand the board and marketing expertise, keep me in mind. And he remembered that conversation, and 6 months later asked if I was interested in meeting some of the executive team of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and if I was wanted to stand in nomination. And he threw it out there that it was very much like a job interview, which it is to be a trustee, that we're kind of like Supreme Court judges. We don't have set term limits. We do have terms, but the entire board kind of rolls over from term to term as long as you're making your commitments and being involved and contributing to the mission of the organization. So they treat it very seriously when they consider a new trustee coming on, because they may be stuck with that person for a very long period of time.
Right.
And so he kind of prefaced this as like, happy to put your name out there. There's a lot of people interested in being a trustee of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You might not be selected. You probably won't be selected, but I'll throw your name. And they're like, well, thanks for the encouragement. It sounds like I'm going to offer you, I'm going to introduce you for this almost job opportunity where you're going to spend a lot of money and time and effort, and you're probably not going to be selected anyway. And for some reason, I said, yeah, sure, why not? And here we are 17 years later as being a national trustee of the Rock Hall. I leave for London, where we're actually having our board retreat in a couple days before I head to Malta. It's the first time we've ever had our board retreat overseas. And it's been an incredible experience because, as you said, it is the institution that protects and preserves and honors the contributions of these incredible cultural influencers to all of us. And yeah, it's a privilege to be involved in it. I do get a lot of calls, texts, emails from people asking, why is so-and-so not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? That's a whole other subject.
Or why is so-and-so in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, yes, that happens all the time. And what I try to tell people, and we as an organization try to tell people, is we are a big tent. Rock and roll at its roots kind of emanated from African beat music through the early days of R&B and soul, and its progression as an art form has continuously moved. And so we often think of rock and roll through the prism of when we were first exposed to it and when we first became popular, for us. But that changes through various generations. And so if you don't continue to evolve the definition of rock and roll, and you don't see it through the evolution of it, then it becomes very static. And for many people, you'd only induct acts from the mid to late 60s through the, I don't know, maybe early 90s, and it would stop there in many people's minds. And so, we try to be very inclusive in the way that we look at artists and define them. And we're also, by the way, we're the only place that has a big enough definition to do that. The Country Music Hall of Fame is very focused on country, and the R&B now has a Hall of Fame. They're very focused on the R&B and those early influences. So the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just very, very expansive in its definition now. And speaking of, we're going through a major expansion of the museum itself. We're about to announce kind of our definitive plans to almost double in size and so on, so that we can showcase and honor even more of those artists.
Well, incredible. You mentioned the wide range of acts who are inducted, 7 of them this year for the 2023 class. Kate Bush, Sheryl Crow, Missy Elliott, George Michael, Willie Nelson.
Yeah.
Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson. Yeah.
Rage Against the Machine and the Spinners. Rage Against the Machine and Willie Nelson. I mean, if that's not a wide spectrum, Rick, I don't know what is.
And that's the idea. And honestly, when Jan Wenner, who was the founder of Rolling Stone, was chairing the nominating committee, and he was also chairperson of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation out of New York that runs the inductions. He had a more narrow, I think, view, and that's not being critical of Jan, but he had a more narrow view of the definition of rock and roll and what periods we should honor. And when John Sykes came on board, who he was the founder of MTV and VH1, he had that wider view of it, right? And you can understand why. The MTV era kind of ushered in new kinds of artists that you were really spotlighting, and VH1 evolved that further. And so, when you look at this year's class, you see that you have a Willie Nelson, and some people look at Willie and say, well, he's country. Well, there's a lot of artists who started out as country artists and have evolved. I would argue, is Keith Urban today? What's that? Taylor Swift. Is Keith Urban today a country artist? Is he a rock? He's one of the best rock and roll guitarists that we've seen in many decades. So there's a lot of artists that have shifted their styles, and Willie actually started very much, in that Texas kind of early stage of both country and rock and roll and crossing over. It just it's taken us a long time to evolve our definition to where we would look to honor him. But obviously, we're very excited in a year in which he's celebrating his 90th birthday to be honoring him this year in the same way that we honored Dolly Parton last year. And then look what Dolly has done. Not only did we get Dolly in after she wasn't originally sure whether she fit the definition, but she's just put out a new rock and roll album, which is, by the way, very good.
Yes.
And bands like Rage, Rage had been on the ballot multiple times and had not gotten voted in. And, as they fuse, rock and roll and hip hop and political rhetoric and so on. And there's somebody that we obviously have felt for a long time needed to be in. But there's a misconception about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's a feeling that when an artist either doesn't get in, that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is keeping them out. And nothing could be further from the truth. We create a slate of nominees among so many that deserve consideration. Then it is up to the voters, the majority of whom are living inductees. So when you are enshrined in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you have a vote until your death. And the majority of those that vote today are the living inductees. So it truly requires a jury of your peers to vote you in. And so we create the slate every year, and then we turn it over to the voters, and it's managers, record executives, station managers at various format stations. So a diverse set. Obviously, those of us who are trustees, and we turn in our ballots, and the ballots decide who gets in, not the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We just try to create diversity in the ballot. And what we try not to do is to create a ballot every year in which the same kind of acts are up against each other, because all you'll end up doing then is splitting the vote, and none of them will get voted in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be very careful in how we construct the ballot to give diverse artists the best chance we can for them to be voted in. And look, there are times where it takes a long time for us to put somebody on the ballot, a Kiss, a Chicago, a Moody Blues, bands like that probably should have been on the ballot earlier. And then the first time we put them on the ballot, they get voted in. But with a band like Rage Against the Machine, this was their fourth or fifth time that they had been on the ballot and had not gotten in. For a Sheryl Crow, a Missy Elliott, this was the first time we put them on the ballot and they got in. For a George Michael, this was the first time. And Willie, for that matter. So it is a very diverse class, and it should be a really fun show on November 3rd at the Barclays Center in New York.
Well, fitting for Sheryl. When you think about it, we've had Jay Ward here on the program, who was part of Pixar Studios and did the Cars films. And of course, the first song that was in the first Cars movie was Sheryl Crow. A song called Real Gone. I'm American, but I like Chevrolet. My mama taught me wrong from right. Cars and music, they kind of go hand in hand, don't they, Rick? I mean, if you looked at the array of individuals who are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and how automobiles have influenced lyrics and songs and settings and cultural impact, right?
Well, of course, right? From Elvis's, kind of pinkish Cadillac. It's not really pink. We have it in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yes, you do.
To Don McLean, drove his Chevy to the levee, right?
Yes,
and talking about Buddy Holly's death.
Yes.
Cars are such a part of the songwriting process with, we romanticize our vehicles, right? And so it's easy for a songwriter to sit down and write about that experience from, young love in the back seat of a car,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through cruising, Bob Seger cruising down Woodward Avenue. You could cite thousands and thousands of examples of some of the most iconic songs being anchored by the automobile. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And country, every country song today seems like there's old jokes about what makes up a country song, but pretty much your truck is in almost every song.
Heart Like a Truck, one of the hits
Heart
right now.
Like a Truck, yeah, Lady Wilson. Yeah.
Amazing. Cars for you. Let's talk about them. Obviously, you grew up in the Detroit area. Yeah. Cars have been a part of your DNA. Everyone has fond memories of their first car. What are some of yours?
So I'll tell you, my first car was an AMC Pacer.
Oh, sure.
My friends used to affectionately call it a fishbowl on wheels.
That's the Wayne's World vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I came home from there was a festival that was held every year on the riverfront at Hart Plaza, and it was pretty funny because it was the very first time I mentioned Budweiser, but it was whatever year this was the very first time Bud Light was introduced in the U.S. market. And they did it down at the festival, and I was pouring beer at the festival. I was in college at the time, and my parents knew I needed a car. And so my dad took some money out of my savings account, and he contributed some, and he went and bought an AMC Pacer. And the thing had rust on it. It needed to be bondoed and repainted, but it was within whatever he decided my price range was. And I got home that night from the festival, and there's this Pacer sitting in the driveway, and I thought, oh, wonder who's staying over at our house. And it was very late. My parents were asleep. I went to bed, got up the next morning and said, whose car is that? My father said, it's yours. I bought it for you. And then I found out he bought it with my money. And it probably wouldn't have been my first choice as a car, but I quickly, we did the work. My dad and I did the bondo work and got it repaired and repainted, and it worked. And I had that for a little while, and then I went through a progression like a lot of young people of used cars before, from there to a Ford Fiesta to a Mustang that leaked oil like crazy, but it was a cool car. The seals they would leak in my parents' driveway to the point where my grandfather got cardboard and put them underneath, and so on. And then when I started, making some real money is when I bought that Ford EXP, which, to me was real money at the time, and have had a progression of cars since then. I've always been a fan of cars with just beautiful lines that were unique. I never wanted to own the vehicle that everyone else had. I was always looking for one that had a style that was all its own, and I've kind of continued that, to this day.
Anything in your current collection that you really admire?
So I drive the Maserati Levante as my day-to-day car now, and I was lucky enough to get the very first one that was delivered here in the state of North Carolina when they were first released. I had that car for a couple months, and then if you want to go to a third incident of car, it was my birthday. I was coming back from a charity golf event, and a woman who was texting and driving, I guess, was on her phone and looked down. She had her kids in her car, and she was about to rear end a person in front of her, and she yanked the car to her left, and she hit me head on at 50 some miles an hour on a 2-lane road. And fortunately, that car had, it was built well. It totaled the car. It was only a couple months old, and I had some minor injuries from it, some chemical burns from the airbags and so on, concussion and that. But she totaled the brand new Levante that I had, but I survived, and took a little while, bought a new one, and now I'm on my third one. So I'm a fan of that vehicle. I still, every time I drive it somewhere, people stop and look at it. They go, hey, can I look at that? And I've got it with I've got a charcoal gray with the red interior, the red leather interior. So it really pops. So I love that vehicle, but I've been a fan of, I've had everything from Porsches to Jaguars to the Mercedes when it first, well, not when it first came out, but shortly thereafter. I had that 600 SL convertible, and so I love cars. I think it's rooted in the DNA. If you grew up in Detroit, you've got an appreciation for those. I remember when the Infinity J30 came out and kind of those slope lines, I had to have one. Love that car, partly because it had that round digital clock in the middle by the dashboard, which
That's
I
right.
thought was
Yeah.
so interesting and unique as a design element. And so I'm sure that when the next car that comes out that is kind of in an exotic category that really speaks to me comes along, I'll be in line to get it.
Some might not know you raise money for a great cause, Teen Cancer America. And there is a backyard get together that occurs once a year, right?
Once a year, yeah. I'm
And
putting this year's show together right now.
this is pretty special stuff. Tell me
Yeah.
about the backyard concert.
So, it's funny because when you're on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it leads to you being asked to be on every other music board that anybody could think of. So I went from that, and I'm now on 5 different music-based charity boards. But one of them is one that was started by the rock band The Who, Teen Cancer America. And that started, there's a little bit of a backstory. There is a charity in the UK called Teenage Cancer Trust. It is the most respected and I think beloved charity in the entire UK. The creative community and the music community has gotten behind that forever. It was started by Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend and Eric Clapton and Paul McCartney, a number of the prominent artists in the UK, to provide funding for teen cancer units throughout the UK because there is a gap in the healthcare delivery system. There are plenty of hospitals that service cancer patients, adult oncology issues, right? And there are pediatric hospitals such as St. Jude that deal with the very young. But there's a gap for those that are in their teens or up to maybe their early 20s, and they don't fit into a St. Jude's. They're too old, and they can't relate to what somebody in their 60s or 70s are dealing with adult forms of cancer. And so Teenage Cancer Trust took off and has been around for almost 3 decades. But 10 years ago in the US, Roger and Pete said, why is there not a US equivalent to this? And so they started Teen Cancer America. And the goal is to have fully staffed teen cancer units in hospitals in every state. And so they have pulled in the music community, as you might guess, many of those who've supported Teenage Cancer Trust, but those that either have been touched by cancer themselves or a family member or so on. And we have become, I guess, the support system now for that age group of cancer. We provide funding for research. We build out the hospital units, the physical space. We give them a safe and welcome place where they are among their peers in hospitals. And so this has become, in particular, Roger Daltrey's passion. He's more passionate about Teen Cancer America and the charity than he is about the Who's music or anything else. But so we host a backyard concert at a private residence in Pacific Palisades each year. And we invite the music community to come and perform and help us raise money. And it's a very interesting curated event. I've been on the board of Teen Cancer America, I think, for 7 or 8 years now. And my agency also gives of its time pro bono wise to help in the marketing of the charity itself. But we put this concert together, and it's not an inexpensive ticket for people to attend. We charge around $5,000 a ticket for the night. Randy Gerber, Cindy Crawford's husband, and Cindy curate the menu. the founder of Patron, helps put the bar part together, and then we ask artists to come in and perform. And I'll give you an example, the kinds of artists we've had play. In a few years ago, we brought in Ed Sheeran at the very height of his popularity. He was kicking off his world tour. He came to Los Angeles to play our backyard concert the night before. By the way, he's just a wonderfully nice human being. But the Who always anchor the show. So in that particular year, we had Jewel and Ed Sheeran and Don McLean. I got Don and Ed to perform together, Van Morrison, and the Who, all a full electric concert in somebody's backyard. And just 2 years ago, we had the Foo Fighters and Pink together with the Who. I think our last show, we had John Fogerty and Green Day and Billy Idol. And so putting together and working with our board to put together this year's show, we have some early commitments. We're working around the dates. We have so many artists that should have become familiar with the charity. They say, yes, I want to play. It's just a matter of fitting it around their touring schedule and so on. So I had the privilege of being at Keith Urban's house a few months ago, and when he became an ambassador for the Buddy Holly Education Foundation, I was presenting him a guitar, and Keith was telling Keith about the charity. He said, why haven't you asked me to play this? I would love to play this. So Keith we're trying to work around his schedule to get him to into this year's show. Ringo Starr is a friend, and we were at his home recently, and he's committed to play with his all-star band. Paul Simon has told us that he will play. Dave Matthews Band has told us they will play. So the issue is, Imagine Dragons have told us they will play. So we have
this to be a 3-day festival.
We do. We do. But the point being, they may not all be part of this year's show. And the Who always play, right? So what we have to do is we're trying to work the dates, among the fall dates, see what dates will work with whom. And then we put the show together, and a few of them will inevitably fall out because they will not be available on the particular day we choose. But it's kind of an abundance of riches in terms of artists who are willing to play the show, want to play the show. It's become such a prestige thing for artists to actually be asked to play it, because let's face it, they are supporting a charity that supports their fans. Those young people are the people who download their songs. We used to say buy their CDs or albums. Now they're buying vinyl again.
Right.
They're the ones who are the ticket buyers to their shows. Those are their audience. So it's a small but very gracious way for them to lend their talents to give back, to help us raise money so that we can build the teen cancer units. And they so they're very giving of their time and their talents in helping us do that. And we raise, in conjunction with our partners at UCLA Medical Center, we're raising upwards of about $5 million in a night toward this effort.
Amazing.
But there's a lot of celebrities that come and support it. For example, Paul Stanley from Kiss comes every year, and he gives a big Kiss package where you can hop on the plane with them and go tour with them and so on. We have had somebody pay $250,000 to play a couple songs on drums with the Who. Sugar Ray Leonard comes every year, and he'll take you on a trip to Las Vegas for a heavyweight or for a major prize fight, and you put you up in a suite. So the celebrities that get behind this, and Scott Dixon is one of our ambassadors, and so he's provided indie pit passes and things like that. So we have this star-studded array of celebrities who've gotten behind the charity and provide experiences to various things. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Lakers are very involved in it, and so they provide packages and things. So a very cool thing to be part of, but we try to never lose sight of the fact that There's a reason we're doing this. And the reason, despite all of the celebrity aspect and so on, is to improve the healthcare delivery system and give these kids a chance at life so that they'll be around and they can be the next you or me and fulfill their dreams.
Well, amazing. It is an incredible story to hear. Yours is an incredible story. And forget Kevin Bacon. It's one degree of separation from Mr. Rick French. Rick, thank you for being a part of the formation of culture and cars in this world. And we look forward to all of your endeavors and the movies that are coming out and the sports teams and on and on and on.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a real treat to chat with you. Love the show, and
thank you.
Congratulations on all your success with it. It's amazing that you've created this concept and you've been able to get so many interesting guests to talk about the convergence of culture and cars, and so it's a privilege to be part of it.
Well, thank you for being part of the program. It's a privilege to have you, Rick.
Thank you.
Thanks again to my guest today, filmmaker, business leader, and car guy, Rick French. And to see my interview with him, go to the Cars and Culture YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to see more than 100 interviews. And you can follow Cars and Culture on LinkedIn and Facebook, as well as on Instagram at Cars and Culture SXM and on Twitter at Cars and Culture. I'm Jason Stein. We'll see you down the road.